Well, I was absolutely devastated. I was very surprised, in fact, that the vote had gone the way that it had. And I remember walking down King's Parade in Cambridge and meeting someone, one of my friends, coming in the opposite direction. And we just hugged each other and we cried. And there were no words, I think. Well, yes, I had never been particularly politically active in my life before. And so the news of the Brexit vote hit me very, very hard. And I think for the first time I became really politically engaged. And I've gone on several marches in London. I've handed out leaflets against Brexit in my city centre, and this is something I'd really never done before. So I would say that that was quite a personal thing for me, that it was a moment when I think politics began to mean something in a very practical and concrete sense. And it was probably the most frightening moment as well, of realising that there was so little power that individuals had to make sure that society continued to function in a happy way. Well, I'm not sure that I think that it changed my view of England as such, because I had been a school child in Germany, and when I came back to England aged 12, you know, there were some very bad experiences just based on the fact that I had lived in Germany for a time. So I think it didn't surprise me, and that I was aware that there was a great deal of hostility in England towards other European countries. But I thought we were heading in the right direction towards greater integration. And I always assumed, I think, that that kind of hostility was something which, as people became more accustomed to travelling within the EU, would fade away, because there's so much to be seen if you travel almost anywhere in Europe about high living standards. There's so much openness and acceptance. And for me, I sort of hoped, if you sort of, I mean, I hoped that others would go through the same experience of integration that I had had as a child, very much. In terms of where I think the UK is at this moment as a result of Brexit and preparations for Brexit, it does seem to me that we've suffered enormously, that we're likely to suffer far more. I mean, the news has just come out that the government is stockpiling foods and medicines for the event that a hard Brexit goes ahead, and there's an anticipation that there will be a crisis and there will be shortages of foods and vital medicines. And if that happens, you know, this is a self-inflicted injury. It was unnecessary. I can see already the enormous economic effects. Lots of companies leaving the UK, lots of people leaving the UK. I belong to Remain groups on social media, and I've seen people disappear. I've had my colleagues tell me that they've either already left or are planning to leave. So there is an enormous exodus going on. And I don't know exactly what the main measure should be for identifying a country's status in the world, but I think if you take the economic, the cultural and the social all together, this is a very bad blow for the UK, and an unnecessary one. Devastated. Well, I think it has changed my life, particularly on a professional level. I was hoping to apply for a major European grant for funding to do research with various other people in the other EU states, and given the current uncertainty, I can't do that anymore. I can't hire postdoctoral researchers and put them through a potential removal of funding in the middle of their employment. So that's a professional sense. I think just in a personal sense, I would say that I haven't stopped worrying. I wake up every morning and it's there, you know, to be worried about, to be thought about. And it feels as though we're so impotent trying to do anything about it. And that's very upsetting. It's devastating, really, as I said. So I don't quite know how else to put it, except that it would be nice to be able to feel that we still could stop it and reverse it. Yes, I did. I did think of taking another passport. It's quite hard for me to do because although I've lived in other countries and work in other countries, I don't have any sort of legal entitlement to citizenship elsewhere. I thought also of moving to another country and getting a job there. So far, a good job has not presented itself, but I think if it did, then I would go, because I don't want my children to have to live through what Brexit will bring. I don't want them to be exposed to the xenophobia, the hate crime, everything that's going on at the moment in this country. And I also think that the economic collapse that we'll face will devastate their younger years as well. I think it's just, in general, a situation that many people are trying to escape. Well, actually, I think you need to start with asking where the EU fits in European history. And this is very important because, and in my lifetime, this has been the case, that there have been no wars, there's been prosperity, there's been social welfare, and sustaining that for a period of 60 years or more is something which in European history is really unparalleled and unprecedented. And if you were to look at a map of all the wars that have occurred over the last 300 years of European history, you'll see that this has been the longest stretch of peacetime at any point in that time, and we have lived through it. We've been the lucky ones. I think I realise now, and Brexit has made me see, that it's necessary to keep fighting to defend that peace and that stability. It's not something that can be taken for granted. Perhaps we've become a bit, self-contented with our lot and our situation. And I think other things have happened that have made it easy for populist leaders around Europe to stir up things like Islamophobia or opposition to migrants. But I would say that these are actually false narratives, that migration has been going on for centuries, and that there is absolutely no sense in which migration has had or will have or can have the devastating effects that those populist leaders are claiming that it will. And so I think the problem with Brexit is that it's founded ultimately on a terrible error, a misunderstanding of history, poor knowledge of the last decades. So, for example, the EU is being portrayed as a setup that is dangerous for Britain, as something which is robbing it of prosperity and sovereignty. In fact, exactly the opposite is true. And Britain went into union, economic and cultural union, with other European countries because in the breakdown of the empire after World War II, Britain rapidly became the sick man of Europe. And ultimately, it was necessary. There was no way to salvage the British economy except by joining forces with other European states. And what we've seen since the early 1970s is a continuous rise in prosperity and comfort. And I think the difficulty is that with Brexit, actually, that standard of living is going to change. It's going to tumble. And most people who voted leave probably are not prepared for that, because they don't have that longer term historical perspective on what things used to be like and what things have been like for many generations before us. Yes, I think of myself very much as a European, and I know that this is unthinkable for many people in my country. And the reason why I think of myself as a European is quite simply because of a life spent moving from country to country. I mean, I work on French history. I grew up partly in Germany and partly in Italy. I have a complete identity as a European. That's where I feel at home. And for me, Brexit feels like having a limb amputated, really. I feel as though part of me is cut off from the whole, and that's very sad.